Hi, everyone. I just want to take a few minutes to look a little bit more at chapters 5, 6, and 7, add some highlights as you look at the reading for week 3, and at least put some of this in context. Because remember, the last 2 weeks, we've certainly been looking at the big picture of organizations, the external forces impacting performance, internal forces impacting performance, started to look a little bit at that person organization interface, but this week we're going to focus specifically on the individual portion of that. So as you take a look at the reading 5, 6, and 7, there is a separate video specifically to emotional intelligence, which is a section of this reading that also then corresponds to our applied assignment. But let's hit on some of those other areas just to give you some ideas, some examples, and point out to you what I really want to make sure you're focused on. So let's take a look at these. Chapter off with really this broad brush about people. So think about just for a few moments, as simple as it sounds, what makes you you? So when you think about people as part of organizations, whether they're volunteer, whether they're paid, whether a board or committee, a workplace, any type of team is made up of individuals. So those individuals bringing their own background and experience and who they are absolutely impact the nature of that team. So we see in the reading, we start out with some of the concepts like self-concept and self-esteem. And a lot of the things I see in my own work with individuals as part of organizations get tied to this, how they see themselves, as well as how much confidence do they have in their own belief and their own value. That drives a lot of behaviors. And you're going to hear me say that a number of times, even in this short video, because what we're really thinking about is behaviors themselves. So as that person and organization interface, what's motivating those behaviors? I'm going to add this in just a moment, but I'm going to say it here. All behaviors motivated. All behaviors motivated. The question is by what? So if I have a poor self-concept, that I just don't see the value or the worth of my contribution with that low self-esteem, it's absolutely going to impact my behavior. Other kinds of concepts would include self-efficacy, my belief in my ability to be successful. Again, we see that play out in all sorts of examples within organizations. Self-monitoring, just that ability to gauge. I love the phrase that often I'll use in talking about employee behavior. Some people are simply more aware of their behaviors than others. So we see that in the emotional intelligence, but that self-monitoring is, can I pick up on the cues in myself and make good decisions based on where I'm at and what kind of situation I'm in? Which leads us to this personality piece. So one of the ways that I look at personalities, we all came born into this world with some stuff, right? Qualities and characteristics you didn't pick, nor did your parents pick. So that DNA, that just pure structure that wired you as you, right, comes into this world and is absolutely influenced by those first few years of life. Some researchers, even if you believe in lifespan development, a lot of researchers point to about that age 6 or 7, where a lot of the components that especially we study in organizations later with regards to employees and personality influence, a lot of those behaviors were visible by about age 6. So I'd like to be able to say, if you have a 7-year-old in your life, take a good look. Right now, it doesn't mean we're done. Certainly it evolves a little bit more through adolescent years, but by adulthood, personality, those qualities and characteristics that are persistent over time, are pretty well established. So we also see in the reading about personality what's called the Big Five. So take a look through that material. You can also do some internet searches and pull up some free personality assessments on the Big Five, DISC, Colors, Myers-Briggs. There's some short free ones out there that just may be of interest to you. And what these are looking at is consistent patterns of where you're at or what you act like. Now remember, certainly if you have a question about this any part of this reading, just drop that note into one of our discussion boards. Feel free this week to add in some other comments that maybe you're thinking about as you process this material. When we look at the big five especially, right, extroversion. So again, think about these as a continuum. Extroverted people draw their energy from being around other people. Introverts draw their energy from being alone. So you may be at one end of that continuum or the other end of that continuum, or maybe even somewhere in the middle. Well, I live as an extrovert and I'm okay being around people. I definitely continue to score as an introvert because that's how I recharge. I don't recharge by being around a lot of people. I recharge by being alone. So I tend to lean more towards the introversion side. However, I'm still fairly in the middle. So think about where you might fall on that and how has that been consistent for you over time. The Big Five also looks at agreeableness, right? So as you look at some of these definitions, conscientiousness is another one, emotional stability, and openness to experience. So again, these are some things that we see that were visible early on and tend to stay consistent over time. So this Big Five theory was just one. Certainly there are other theories out there. There are different types of assessment. What I really want you thinking about at work is, and this is going to sound so silly for just a moment, but bear with me. Is it a good use of your energy this week to try and change your coworker's DNA? Well, of course not. That seems absolutely silly. Well, let me ask it a different way. Is it a good use of your energy this week to try and change your coworker's personality? Nope. Why? Because it's been around a long time, right? That early life experience combined with DNA, making you who you uniquely are, that personality piece is going to be consistent over time. So what I really want you thinking about with this personality component are what are the behaviors we're seeing at work and what can we learn from those? And one of the other components we see with that personality piece is the locus of control. So this is mentioned at the end of the Big Five. And so internal locus of control is mentioned. So this is just another area we look at in terms of personality, a component of personality that's consistent over time. So people have a strong internal locus of control. If you put this again in a continuum, internal locus of control, external locus of control. External locus of control is everything happens to me. There's nothing I could do about it. This happened and these things were outside of my control. Internal locus of control, I control my destiny. If I want to figure it out, I make it happen. Those are two very different worldviews. And so I need to understand that I am never going to take a person who is consistently everything happens to me and make them an I control my destiny person. It's just not going to happen. But what we want to focus on, especially with an organizational behavior and how it connects to decision making, is as we drive performance, is what can I learn about the personality traits of my coworkers, my team members, and understand the contributions that they can make as a result. So while we're never going to fix locus of control, not everybody should be internal. And yet, what are those behaviors that help us not get stuck in maybe a lack of accountability or lack of motivation on the external? And so let's take a look at a few examples. Personality and behavior, personality tests. Some of you have probably taken some DISC or Myers-Briggs or Colors. If you haven't, again, there's lots of free online web resources out there. If you're stuck and you're not finding one, let me know and I'll happily get you connected. Personality tests within teams are just great ways to have some of those aha moments to go, oh, that makes sense. That's so much more you than it is me, right? So personality tests can give us some of those additional understanding and insights about our coworkers so that we might next time really understand that that's just really a part of who they are. It's the behavior we need to continue to adjust for, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. Some of the other areas with personality and behavior the text talks about is our ability and our skill set. Certainly our intelligence and cognitive abilities. are different types of multiple intelligence, including EQ or emotional intelligence that comes up this week. These are all part of it. So again, personality is one component, but we know it's a huge predictor of behavior. Psychological capital is a great point to read in the textbook that then develops into the resiliency conversation. And so we see those highly connected to personality. Let me give you a couple of examples. You can probably, usually I find it within families. So you can probably think of a family member of yours who has just endured, or maybe a friend endured so many obstacles in life, and they just keep bouncing back. They're so resilient. And yet you can probably think of somebody else you've known where they just don't have that capacity. The slightest thing comes through in life and they just don't seem to be able to cope. And so those are important components because, again, that tends to be consistent over a lifetime. It doesn't mean learning can't change us, but that we tend to be pretty consistent about this over time. Let's take a look. So what else drives behavior, right? Values, something that you're passionate about, that's just so important to you, that drives. Or then the textbook talks about how these might conflict. So the issue of values conflicting can certainly cause us some pause and may help us make some choices about our behaviors. Attitude. Attitude is just one of those phrases that in US business culture, we tend to take negatively. And so I like to put it this way. If someone says to me, man, that person's got an attitude, I always say, about what? An attitude about what? Because if I can find where that attitude is pointed, that I can see where those behaviors then are aimed, I can understand why the attitude is there. So we might say an overall good attitude or poor attitude, but if we can find more clearly an attitude about, right? So a great attitude about my job, a bad attitude about my supervisor, good attitude towards this customer, bad attitude towards that customer. All of those things help us understand a little bit more about these sets of behaviors tied to perception that and values that drive behavior. Three of the main work attitudes that we study in organizational psychology that are important for you to be aware of, and you've heard these before, but pay particular attention to them in this week's reading: organizational commitment, employee engagement, and job satisfaction. There's tons of research out there in these three areas, but just really understanding how committed am I to an organization? Do I feel an obligation? Do I feel like I'm contributing? What's my commitment level? Engagement, how motivated am I? Gallup has some amazing studies out on, and there's plenty of published work about the level of disengagement primarily by employees and how we just lose so much potential capacity for performance because people are not engaged. And then that last one, job satisfaction. Job satisfaction is typically viewed in two ways. We can ask an overall, how satisfied are you with your job, and have you do more of a global look at that? Or we can ask you about job satisfaction, what's called in terms of factor. So are you satisfied with your compensation levels? Are you satisfied with your supervisor? So we can look at the factor levels too. But take a look at that reading, and certainly in our discussion this week, jump in with some comments or questions that you have. Let's take a look at a couple more things. Organizational citizenship, as mentioned, we're starting to see more and more about what are my ethical choices? Do I represent my organization well? So think about being a good citizen. Are you doing that on behalf of your company? And then there's all those behaviors at work that aren't helping us get to our goals. So we're going to dig into these a little bit more in separate sections, but certainly take a look at those counterproductive behaviors. But I do want to pause for just a minute at this point in time and really hone in a little bit more on this behavior stuff. So while I like this textbook and I think it adds good value to the things we're working on, I would love to see the author spend a little bit more time on the behavior piece. Take just a minute in this video to add in a few more comments. When you look at the definition of behavior, behavior is the combination of responses or reactions made by an organism in any situation related to the environment. The way I want you to think about this is I do something and my environment gives me a response. That was a good choice. That was not such a good choice. Behavior is always in an interaction. It's a dynamic process with the environment we're in. All behavior is motivated. I mentioned this a few minutes ago. Here's where it is on your slide. All behavior is motivated. The question is by what, right? So even if you look at somebody and go, oh, they are so unmotivated. Oh, they're motivated. They're just motivated by something you're not seeing. Behavior, remember, can be conscious or unconscious. So think about this. Conscious or subconscious is really what we're thinking about because there are levels of consciousness. So conscious is I do it and I know it. Or subconscious, unconscious in those bottom layers, or I do it so automatically I don't pay any attention. So one of the first questions, I love people who call me up and say, hey, Selena, you wouldn't believe what my employee did today. And it's never usually the good stuff they call about, once in a while, but most of the time I get the obnoxious stories. And one of my first questions, or just the struggle stories, even one of my first questions always is, though, did they know? Did they do it and they know it? Because that's a very different coaching conversation than somebody who's done it so automatically they didn't even know they were doing it. And a lot of times I hear from someone who went, oh, man, this person's driving me crazy. This is what they've been doing. And I say, so how long has this been going on? And they're like, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, because no one addressed it. And that's something to really think about, because while I can do something overtly or I can do something covertly, I can do something voluntary or in. The reality is that people choose behaviors because it's worked for them in the past. So I think I can continue to get away with this. And I think it's going to work for me in the future. And I don't know what to change to, then I'm going to keep doing it. So that's really important for us to consider at work is why do we see the behaviors we do? Because it's always in relationship to the environment. I do want to make the point, though, for your consideration this week that some people are simply more aware of their behaviors than others. Some people do something and they immediately know there's an impact to the people around them. And some people do something and like, hoo-hoo, clueless, right? Just they don't know. So when you think about behaviors at work, what I want you doing this week is looking around. Now, don't look like, you're stalking them, but take a look around and just see some of those behaviors. What are the behaviors you're seeing? Are they consistent? Are they like that person? If they're not like that person, what might be a shift in that? Because remember, if you go back to our week 1, we looked at this humans and organization and the way they interface, all part of the environment. So connect that idea to what we're thinking about behavior. Because remember, it's always interacting. The individual, the situation, back and forth, dynamic relationship, contribute. Let's look at just a few more things affecting behavior. This will finish up our reading for this week. Perception, right? So perception, the way I process things and interpret the world around me. So if you think about it, every single piece of information we take in comes in through our 5 senses. Everything you know about the world absolutely comes in through those 5 senses. So even if I take hearing and I hear it, right? That's listening, that's hearing. It's a physical process. Perception is what my brain does with it once I take in all of that information from my senses and process it. So some things we want to think about is just what we pay attention to and the communication model. So all that information comes in, I need to encode it, store it, and be able to retrieve it, hopefully when I need to. Now, there are some of us who can probably relate to the fact that I can be sitting here going, oh man, it's right there, tip of tongue phenomena. I know it's there. I can almost picture where it is in my brain, but I can't remember maybe a name, or I can't remember something that I worked on. And I'm like, man, it's right there. So that affects behavior. Other ways we apply this at work, think about perception with hiring. So one of the errors that we see with hiring is similarity error. Oh, this person reminds me so much of myself. And so now the interview can get skewed because, we related so well, we connected so well. That's a perception issue. I took that information in, I compared it to something else I knew, or contrast error. Now I'm comparing this person against this person, and wow, I really didn't like that person. So now it skewed my perception on this person. These are errors in thinking that we need to guard against and make sure we're not doing. Performance appraisals, this can come also out because there's always going to be that element of performance appraisals that are subjective. So recency error. I really only evaluate the 12 months on the last 3 months because that's what I remember the most. How many of you know what was happening in your team 362 days ago, right? We just don't remember that kind of detail. So if I'm evaluating my operators on the entire 12 months, I need to make sure I do it on the entire 12 months, not just recency or not just something they did well, halo effect, or something they did bad, horn effect, but really as consistently as possible. We need to safeguard against stereotypes. Even positive stereotypes narrow down what we get to know in terms of individuals. So stereotypes help us organize our thoughts and ideas based on categorization and just helps us process information, but that perception can lead to stereotypes, which then again affects behavior. Self-fulfilling prophecy is mentioned in the reading. It's just a good one to note, right? So if I believe it and I perceive it and this is what I'm going after and it changes my behavior, that self-fulfilling prophecy is, see, told you I wasn't going to be able to do this, and so now I didn't do it well. So again, it's that choice and behavior that gets reinforced by perception in the environment. The last item I want to talk about for this insight video, and it's the last part of the textbook reading, is attribution. So attribution is where, based on my perception, I apply or I attribute cause and effect. So I want to think about what caused. So think about this. If you and I are working together and maybe the relationship's been a little crunchy, you don't know me, I don't trust you as well, we just haven't worked well together. If I'm expecting an update from you and I don't get it, and I don't have a good relationship with you, or maybe if it's even been bad in the past, I'm more likely to not give you the benefit of the doubt. I'm more likely to go, didn't give me the right report. Guess they didn't want to help me out very much, right? How do we apply cause? So if I like you, I'm more likely to give you a cause of positive intention. I wonder what happened. Maybe I should call and find out because, God, he or she wouldn't let me down like that. And so that gets us to that fundamental attribution bias of how do we place that blame or bias if we don't know each other. When I get called in to work with clients, there are usually a couple of things I look for first with an organization. If there's some difficulty going on, I first look at the senior team and how the senior team is treating each other. Because if they're not treating each other well, I know what's being cascaded throughout the organization typically. For those of you who are used to multiple shifts, that always lends itself well to this attribution error. So think about the phrases we use. It was first shift, it was second shift, it was third shift, it was engineering, it was sales, it was production, it was this department or that department. How we attribute cause becomes really important in those decisions. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm a second shift team lead. So you can apply this to any shift or any type of department. I'm just going to pick a general example here. So I'm a second shift team lead. Team member walks up to me and says, what was day shift doing all day long anyways today? Man, what a mess they left us. Now, as a team lead, I need to use good emotional intelligence to say, wow, they're going to model this for me. So what do I need to say? Well, that's not the typical response I tend to see. So let's look at the scenario. Team member walks up to me and says, man, what was day shift doing all day long anyways? Man, what a mess they left us. Team lead, option number one. I don't know what day shift was doing all day long. Better batten down the hatches, me a long flippin' night, right? That's one potential response. It's attributing cause to the fact that, man, day shift screwed up again today, and because of that, our night is just going to be rough. Or That team lead who has the discipline to hit their pause button for a moment and recognize that what they model, this team member will continue to model. And so if I can hit my pause button in that moment and go, whoa, I hear your concern. Tell me what you know. I'm sure Day Shift did everything they could today in their power to do so. So while I check on A, B, and C that you brought up, let's do this. Let's put a plan together tonight to leave them in even better shape later. So again, it's just how we choose to respond to the environment around us based on our skills and our strengths and our experiences, based on our personality styles, and understanding how we choose the behavior we exhibit and why it's reinforced or it's not reinforced within our teams and companies. So that's a lot of stuff to think through, but there's so much rich content in our reading. So please feel free, bring it into our discussions, bring up some of those examples. Let me know how I can help. I look forward to our continued discussion and another great week ahead here at Iowa Wesleyan. I'll talk to you soon. Take care.